I'll just alert them.
Okay.
So you don't have to worry about that.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We are about to start. That's the signal. I am Rabbi Gordon Tucker. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Religious Life and Engagement here at JTS, and on behalf of Chancellor Shuli Rubin Schwartz and our entire team here, and wonderful crew of people who have worked in various ways on all the details related to this convening. On behalf of all of them, I'm welcoming you here again today. There may be some what we call panim chadashot, new people here today who were not here yesterday. We especially welcome you to this second and final day of this convening. But it's actually, as you heard yesterday from our Chancellor, it's not really the final bit of convening about Zionism, because there will be part two in the spring in April 1st and 2nd. So you can mark your calendars right now, and further details will be coming in the weeks and months ahead about that. So I just really wanted to welcome you, let you know that this session, which is chaired by my colleague, Dr. Tamara Newman, our Director of Convenings, I'm going to turn it over to her in just a moment, but just to let you know this from the program already, that after an hour here, there will be some breakout sessions, which we actually got requests for that the last time we had a convening. So we're pleased to be able to offer that, and want to note that there will be a specifically designated one for rabbis and clergy, actually, and one for educators. There will be instructions after the first hour of this session for where those rooms are, and there'll be people to guide you there and to get all of those logistics done. So without further ado, Dr. Newman.
Hi. Okay. The mic is on. I'm supposed to request that you speak directly into the mic because people lost some of what people were saying beforehand. So the title of the session is Judaism and Zionism, the role of religion in democracy. And what we imagine doing is to have people say their piece at first, have a facilitated conversation among the panelists, take a couple of questions, and then break out for smaller discussions. And you'll have further instructions as Gordon mentioned later on. So my first guest, first speaker is Dr. Sarah Yael Hirsch Orn, who's currently lecturer at the Ruderman Program in American Jewish Studies and senior researcher at the Comper Center at the University of Haifa. She's also a fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute in Jerusalem. She was previously appointed as the visiting assistant professor in Israel Studies at Northwestern and the university research lecturer in Israel Studies at the University of Oxford. Her research, teaching, and public engagement activities focus on diaspora-Israel relations, the Israel-Palestine conflict, and the Israeli ultra-nationalist movement. Her first book, which is fabulous, City on a Hilltop, American Jews and the Israeli Settler Movement, published by Harvard in 2017, was the winner of the 2018 Sammy Rohr Prize. She's currently working on a new manuscript entitled New Day in Babylon and Jerusalem, Zionism, Jewish Power, and Identity Politics since 1967. She's an internationally recognized public speaker, writer, and educator. Please welcome Sarah. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Newman. You make me sound so good on paper. I hope you can all hear me. I apologize for the mask. I'm trying to stay healthy before I return to Israel tonight. If you have any trouble hearing me, just put up your hand and I'll try and speak a little bit louder. I wanted to start today's session by discussing a bit of new polling data that has been issued in the last few days that I think illustrates the conflict between American Jews and Israelis when it comes to the questions of Judaism and Zionism and the role of religion in democracy. A Channel 12 television poll in Israel yesterday, or excuse me, 2 days ago now, found that Israelis support Donald Trump 66% to Kamala Harris at 14%, whereas American Jews are split approximately 63% for Kamala Harris. Can't hear me? Okay. 63% for Kamala Harris to 24% for Donald Trump. Of course, in the United States, Trump voters cite Israel as their main issue at 95% for their support of the candidate, whereas Harris voters only would cite Israel as their top priority in 31% of cases, and that was from a JPPI poll from yesterday. So I think we get a sense that the numbers are flipped, essentially that Israeli Jews prefer Donald Trump at the same rate that American Jews would prefer Kamala Harris to be their next president. Furthermore, American Jews demonstrate clearly that when they are asked about their preferences in Israeli elections, that they would vote for center or center-left parties in Israel, as opposed to the electorate in Israel, which today is voting for center-right, right-wing, and even ultranationalist parties. I think this illustrates a major divide over visions and vocabulary for the Zionist future. Neither population shows that much interest in understanding the preferences of the other. We don't really hear that many Israelis asking why American Jews are overwhelmingly supportive of Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Likewise, I don't think that American Jews necessarily are delving into the details about why Israelis are voting in a way that they just can't seem to understand, including for the current coalition in Israel, which doesn't seem to align with many of the policy preferences that American Jews have for the future of Zionism. I think the divide today can be understood rather simply, in fact, that Israelis are primarily preoccupied with survival, and American Jews are somewhat more preoccupied with democracy, especially in the wake of October 7th, where these issues have come into a far more stark relief. At the moment, we really have a kind of difference here also between a vision of a Jewish state and a state of the Jews, der Judenstaat, which was what Herzl's initial vision for Zionism was, a secular Zionist state that would represent Jewish self-determination, a safe refuge from anti-Semitism and persecution around the world, and a national liberation movement for the Jews. Despite the polyphony of Zionist visions, and we should remember that Zionism has never been one homogeneous concept, but rather we might speak more of Zionisms with an S at the end of it and a lowercase z, or lowercase z, to suggest that Zionism has always been quite heterogeneous. At the end of the day, Zionism as an idea was focused more on the founding of a state and the survival of that state, rather than necessarily the democratic character of that state. It was thought mostly of a state of the Jews, and later, after 1967, has evolved more into a specifically Jewish state with Jewish characteristics, and perhaps even in some cases, the elevation of Jewish characteristics over democracy. Whereas American Jews, I think, have always understood Zionism, as we heard from Elliot Cosgrove yesterday, as integral to the practice of American democracy and as part of their identity as American Jews living in a liberal, heterogeneous world of many different groups with many different interests, and later, certainly after 1967, as part of a constellation of identity politics. So we have very different understandings of what Zionism is about, and I think this is reflected in today's generational divide between young American Jews and young American Israelis. There's a real conflict here between social justice, tikkun olam, and survival. Each group is focused on a different set of priorities, and this is leading us in vastly different directions. But what does any of this have to do with religion and the role of religion in the makings or unmakings of democracy in Israel? I think we need to zoom out for a moment and suggest that Judaism has always been a kind of multiple choice menu of a variety of characteristics in which Zionism can be one of many choices. Jews can be people of only prayer and practice, who are interested mostly in halakha. This can often represent a non- or anti-Zionist position of what Jewry is, or what Judaism as a faith tradition espouses. For other people, it has not just the aspects of prayer and practice, but also of peoplehood. And further, there are some who feel that Judaism as a tradition also involves nationhood. And for many, especially American Jewish Zionists, perhaps of a previous generation, as well as for many Israeli Jews, Judaism represents, choices A, B, and C: prayer and practice, peoplehood, and nationhood. But of course, that isn't the only way people can practice Judaism, and many decide to combine those choices in different ways, which evolve into anti-, non-, and Zionist variants of Judaism. As we said before, the evolution of the State of Israel from a state of the Jews to a Jewish state post-1967 brought many changes to the way that Zionism characterized itself as Judaism entered the definition of Zionism in a new way. Unlike the Herzlian definition of Zionism, which focused on a secular state, we can imagine a kind of Vienna on the Mediterranean. After 1967, Israel became much more of a Jewish state, even sometimes one that had messianic aspirations that Herzl himself never would have dreamed of, and probably as a quite un-Jewish Jew himself may never have even been aware of as part of the Jewish tradition. But religion is not Jewish politics, and Jewish politics is not religion. Furthermore, Zionism can sometimes act as a bridge between Judaism and religion, but it sometimes also acts as a dam between Judaism and religion, in fact, sort of blocking the role of the integration of these two concepts. Furthermore, the dialectical relationship between American Jewry and Israeli Jewry isn't necessarily following the same script of American Judaism today. Here in America, when we think about the definition of what Judaism is and the way people practice their faith, the Pew Survey and other sources of data would suggest that American Jews are overwhelmingly interested in cultural Judaism as opposed to strict definitions of halakha or traditional practices of other generations. Meanwhile, this cultural Judaism is meeting what has often been remarked upon as the Israeli century, a kind of laboratory of Jewish practice, faith, and tradition happening in Israel that is much more interested in concepts of a new halachic state, a new state of practice under the practice of religious law, that is interested further in the evolution of different kinds of faith traditions, practices, prayer rituals and other things. So we have kind of a culture clash between the way American Jews are practicing Judaism in the United States and the way Israeli Jews are practicing Judaism in Israel, as much as the way Zionism looks different in both countries at the moment. So we very much have American Jews and Israeli Jews experience a kind of lost in translation effect, both in their understandings of what Zionism is and what their understandings of the way Judaism looks and the way those two concepts might be integrated. My own research is very much focused on this kind of dialectical relationship and integration between American Zionism and Israeli Zionism. My first book, City on a Hilltop, that was mentioned before, looked at the over 60,000 American Jews that have participated in the project of settlement in the occupied territories, or if you prefer, the territories over the Green Line. And unlike what we may think or have a stereotypical image in our mind, these were groups of American Jews who were born and bred in the American Jewish 1960s, who mobilized liberal values towards an illiberal project. One of the surprising findings here were these were, basically hippies who went to come live on a hilltop, who were really trying to draw upon their American backgrounds, both their experience of American Jewish liberalism and the tactics of the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam struggle, as well as their participation in the Democratic Party and progressive politics around the 1967 war, to suddenly moving over the Green Line to what many today would consider to be a highly illiberal project. But we can say here that this was really an aspect where Judaism wasn't actually the driving factor for this group, as much as they came to Israel and later to the occupied territories to try to realize their Jewish and Zionist aspirations in a way they felt was impossible for them in the United States, perhaps even here in New York City. They did not necessarily come to the settler project with the same aspirations, goals, and motivations as native Israeli settlers. They didn't come from a messianic background or necessarily a hard right, ultra-nationalist, or even what many of us think of as maybe a Kahanist background, but rather came from the left and found themselves in Israel on the political right. I think this tells us something about the flexibility and malleability of the role of both Judaism and democracy in moving from one continent to the other. Likewise, I'm trying to now think about this in reverse, about what has been the impact of Israel. So I guess my first book, I would say, was about the impact of American Jews on Israel, or on a certain element or constituency within Israeli society. My second book is now looking in the other direction. What has the impact been of Israel on the United States since the 1967 war? Particularly how Zionism in Israel have intervened in, or we might even use the parlance of the tech world and say has disrupted the constitution of diaspora Jewish communities and created vast polarization, both amongst and within American Jewry and its different denominations and focuses, as well as between the American Jewish public and other groups. I'm interested in thinking about how Israel has come to intervene in the parting of ways between Zionism and the left, something that we may forget actually went together prior to the 1967 war and only after 1967 and really into the 1970s. As we came to the 1975 Zionism as Racism Resolution began to go in very vastly different directions. And thinking about this as kind of the first iteration in the current debates that we're having today about the future of allyship, about whether Zionism and progressivism can go together, how people with both deeply Zionist and deeply progressive commitments can find some kind of unified alternative or unified identity for themselves. And I think this tells us something else also about the ways Zionism, Judaism, and religion can all go together. Ultimately, I think no model, Judaism, Zionism, or democracy, has actually solved the fundamental question that Zionism came to address, which was the Jewish question in Europe, and why emancipation has never really provided a safe haven for Jewish survival in any country where Jews have lived outside of a place of Jewish sovereignty. Not Europe, not the United States, as we've seen very recently with the spike of anti-Semitism here, that perhaps this suggests the wobbliness of the project of of American democracy and where this is going. Not, not South Africa, not Australia, not any other country where American Jews have, Canada, any other country where American Jews have tried to find a place for themselves in Western democracies. Actually, I think the only model that really would be viable here is a model that focuses not on Judaism, Zionism, or democracy, but one that really thinks about liberalism. It seems that the only place where Jews are truly safe is in a liberal space, not necessarily a strictly Jewish space or a strictly Zionist space or even a strictly democratic space. And this is a project that I think that both American Jews and Israeli Jews hopefully could think forward together with their own visions and vocabularies of what liberalism is about to ensure a safer future.
Thank you. That's great. And now we'll hear from Rabbi Rick Jacobs. Rabbi Rick Jacobs is president of the Union for Reform Judaism, the most powerful force in North American Jewish life. The URJ leads the largest and most diverse Jewish movement in North America, reaching more than 2 million people through 825 congregations, 14 overnight camps, the Reform Teen Youth Movement, NFTY, and the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. For more than 150 years, the URJ has been at the forefront in promoting an open, progressive Judaism. A longtime and devoted creative change agent, Rabbi Jacobs spent 20 years as a spiritual leader in Westchester Reform Temple in Scarsdale, New York. Before that, during his tenure as the rabbi of the Brooklyn Heights Synagogue, he created the first homeless shelter in a New York synagogue. He's a tireless advocate for an Israel that is secure, Jewish, democratic, and pluralistic, with a vibrant Reform Jewish community. Rabbi Jacobs is regularly featured in media outlets such as New York Times, Washington Post, Haaretz, The Forward, and NPR, and CNN. Please welcome Rick Jacobs.
Boker Tov, it's good to be here. It's such an important topic, but you could argue that this topic really is not the topic for the moment. We're a Jewish community divided, we're at war in Israel, and there are more urgent things. I would actually argue this may be the underlying most important question for us to be discussing and delving deeply in, and I'm really honored to be doing this exploration with all of my colleagues. So, I have like 5 high-holiday sermons that I'd like to share with you at the moment, but I think I won't. I think we'll just sort of like focus right in and really appreciate Sarah's framing in terms of the current moment. I think, this whole question of a Jewish democratic state seemed for decades to be just obvious. And I think at this moment, there's nothing obvious about it. The Jewish is not obvious. What kind of Jewish? The democratic is not obvious. What kind of democracy? Do they really go together? Are they both thriving? Are either of them thriving? What is happening here regarding religion and democracy? What's that? So these are urgent questions. So I just would like to kind of amplify a couple of key things, and then, of course, hear from my colleague and all of you as we discuss this further. So first of all, I actually can't imagine an Israel that's not Jewish and democratic. That's just as plainly as I can say it, though it's incredibly obvious that there are ministers in the current government who not only can imagine it, but actually can work every day towards an Israel that's not Jewish and democratic, or if it is, maybe some of the definitions are unrecognizable to us. I would just state the obvious: Judaism and democracy are not synonymous. If it were a Venn diagram, there would be overlap, but it would not be a complete overlap. I think that is pretty simple to say. I also think that as we look at the world that we're in, not just the United States and not just the state of Israel, it's pretty clear that democracies have been essential to protecting not only Jewish life, but life. And I would just underscore that we have lived as Jews under authoritarian regimes. We've lived in some of the least democratic places on earth, and the precariousness of Jewish life, I think, is quite evident. One of the things that drives Zionism, of course, is to be able to create a space where we can live in relative safety and comfort and security. And the notion that we could do that without democracy is incredibly flawed. It's incredibly flawed as the challenges to Israel's democracy took place October 6th and before, and they are still very much being fought. Now, just as a fellow, leader of the non-Orthodox Jewish community, and I work so closely with my colleagues here, Rabbi Blumenthal and Yizhar Hess. These are people, my speed dial, as we literally take on some of the big issues of the day. And one of the things, when I'm in the Knesset, meeting with different members of the Knesset, the government, the opposition, one of the things that I endlessly hear, and you hear, which is, really stop talking about, full equality for non-Orthodox Jews. When you all come on Aliyah, or when you grow your movement so dramatically, then you can be entitled to all these things that we call religious freedom. Excuse me, that's actually not how the thing works, or how it's supposed to work. The minority is not somehow subject only to majoritarian ideas. That's true within Jewish life, and it's true within a democratic country. So the ways in which Israel's democracy, both, I think in many ways, not just under-supports non-Orthodox and pluralistic modes of Jewish life, but in many ways officially demonizes, is one of the enduring dilemmas for many of us who love Israel, who work every day with Israelis and for Israel. And I think as we think about democracy, to think about democracy without full religious freedom is an oxymoron. It is, however, a reality in the Jewish state. That simply is obvious. How to talk about a Jewish state where a form of Judaism is not elevated above all other forms is also the dilemma of this moment, and how people who represent some very extreme expressions of Jewish, whether it be Messianic or Jewish supremacists, somehow have the official microphone of the State of Israel, causes us, as liberal Jews, enormous pain, and I think as Zionists, makes us have to answer to expressions of Jewish that are simply anathema to the Judaism that many of us follow. Again, there's lots more to say there. I want to just hit a couple of more of the kind of the overarching themes that feel to me urgent in this moment. And one of the things which is really clear is that, I'll just say it, Sarah, you said it pretty simply in terms of, across the green line. Even as the war continues in Gaza, and there's a war in the north with Hezbollah, there's a war across the straits in Yemen, and now, of course, in Iran. What's clear is the occupied territory of the West Bank continues to be the largest challenge to the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. That may be a subject to debate more. I think it's pretty challenging. And I just want to lift out the one legislative piece that further weakened that essential part of what Israel is and what our relationship for many of us to Israel is built on. And that goes to the nation-state bill of 2018. You remember it was kind of one of these things, well, of course it's a good thing, unless you read all of the details of it. And what the nation-state law did was basically establish a kind of Jewish supremacy in the state of Israel, devalued the place of non-Jewish citizens, particularly Arabic-speaking people, and the one word concept that is essential to have included in that was eliminated, and that is the word equality. Now remember, I walked into Gideon Sa'ar's office when he was the Minister of Justice. He's now rejoined the current government and is not likely to be the Minister of Justice, but may in fact find another portfolio that'll be prominent. And he said, because he was part of the previous government, he said, Rabbi Gilad Kariv and I we think we have a good solution for the missing equality in the nation-state bill. And first of all, I thought I had died and gone to heaven, that the sentence was, Rabbi Gilad Kariv and I. That would lead to anything other than we got into an argument and we agreed that we agree on nothing. They actually had sculpted out legally a way to introduce, reintroduce to the nation-state bill the fundamental concept of equality, which is a basic law now in Israel. That's still missing, and as long as that's missing, and as long as the demography pushes Israel to basically have a state where there's a whole group of people under Israeli sovereignty that have no political rights, the Jewish and the democratic are greatly weakened and dramatically challenged. Again, I'm going to do the rabbinic thing that is often not done. I'm going to actually conclude. And that, by the way, I am sure that's not a case that is all familiar in the conservative movement. In the reform movement, that, however, is a thing. So I'm going to try to model a better behavior. I'm just going to conclude and then hear from Ayelet. If I could just say, what troubles me on this question endlessly is that Zionism is so much more than what any politician in Israel could say. And Judaism is so much more than whatever the chief rabbis of Israel proclaim. And that the future of Jewish life is tied up to these questions, not only in Israel, but for better and for worse, it is tied up for our present and future. And to have an Israel that is both democratic, Jewish in a pluralistic way, that lives out not just some of the extreme messianic supremacist views that are found within Judaism, but the ones that actually animate our Jewish lives and our liberal Zionism. These are essential questions for us not only to debate, but to live. Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, we'll hear from Rabbi Ayelet Cohen, who is Pearl Resnick Dean of the Rabbinical School and Dean of the Cantorial School here at JTS. As leader of the Rabbinical School and H.L. Miller Cantorial School, she works to shape the next generation of Jewish clergy, cultivating students' spiritual and intellectual lives so they can meet the challenges of Jewish life with wisdom, creativity, and resilience. Rabbi Cohen assumed this position in 2022, becoming the first woman to hold this role since the founding of JTS. A nationally recognized activist and writer, Rabbi Cohen is the author of prayers and liturgy used by communities around the world. For more than a decade, she served as a rabbi at Congregation Bet Simchat Torah, the world's largest LGBTQ synagogue, serving Jews of all sexual orientations and gender identities. Her rabbinate has included leadership roles at the New Israel Fund and the Jewish Community Center in Manhattan. She is the author of Changing Lives, Making History, Congregation Bet Simchat Torah, The First 40 Years, and co-editor of Sidur Bechol Levavcha. Please welcome Rabbi Ayelet.
Good morning. It's great to be here with you, and as always, wonderful to learn from distinguished colleagues. I grew up with the Israeli Declaration of Independence as one of the sacred texts of Judaism. The way that we lived Judaism is that we had so many liturgical sacred texts, biblical, rabbinic sacred texts, and in that canon was the Declaration of Independence, a document which expressed in both Jewish and democratic terms what the promises were, what the vision was of what Israel promised to be and could be. If we look at that text now, It contains both historical justifications in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, and it's so interesting to me now to look at that, because we talk about whether understanding the history of the conflict and the history of the region would help people shift in their beliefs if they understood more about what happened. And some people say it's all about history and we need to make sure people understand the history more. And some people say history doesn't matter, and even if they knew more, they wouldn't understand more. This document tries to lay out in its preamble a quick history of the Jewish people, of the justification for why Jews need a safe haven. It has the year 1897, the first Zionist Congress. It has the Balfour Declaration, 1917. And I say this because in talking to clergy colleagues, especially in the last year, and it's been such a hard time for interreligious relationships, and many, many clergy relationships, which for many years were strong and powerful, and people got together at various times of sort of civic religion in this country. Thanksgiving, Martin Luther King Day, moments to really come together and reflect. This has been such a divisive and painful time, and some long time relationships have been profoundly fractured. And part of what's come up, and I spoke with a rabbinic colleague recently who told the story of talking with a close Christian clergy colleague about the conflict. And the rabbi said, well, let me just kind of say a little bit about how we got here, and ran through quickly the First Zionist Congress and the Balfour Declaration. And the Christian colleague said, how do you know this off the top of your head? And that, of course, is so much has been part of what Jewish education has been. This preamble to the Israeli Declaration of Independence has been the preamble to how we were taught to understand the world. With that, of course, also is the language of the Shoah, the tragedy of the Shoah, the need for safe haven. So we have both the understanding that Zionism far predated that terrible moment in history, and that it was that moment in history that made it so clear that it was necessary, and pushed the international community to see that too in that moment. And so this language, which has Jewish history in it, it has the language of the prophets in it, and it's framed in terms of democratic values. The paragraph which is so often quoted, the state of Israel will be open to the immigration of Jews from all countries of their dispersion, will promote the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants, will be based on the precepts of liberty, justice, and peace taught by the Hebrew prophets, will uphold the full social and political equality of all its citizens without distinction of race, creed, or sex, will guarantee full freedom of conscience, worship, education, and culture, will safeguard the sanctity and inviolability of the shrines and holy places of all religions, and will dedicate itself to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Such a moment in time, such big promises, and you see how it's drawing from all of these different traditions. Another line which is quoted less, but I think important to say as well later in the Declaration, we offer peace and unity to all the neighboring states and their peoples, and invite them to cooperate with the independent Jewish nation for the common good of us all. Big promises, big visions, powerful, powerful values. And in the document, we see also the fingerprints of its authors who fought a lot about what this final text would say. In it, we see the experience of a traumatized people who don't even know who has survived the Shoah, are still looking for so many missing family and loved ones, entire communities destroyed, are so aware of the perilous place of Jews in the world, of safety promised and then revoked. and are desperate to establish a safe place, and are not entirely able to separate that from the trauma of their experience that is so live and present for them. And within it, we also see the contradictions and the limited vision of the founders, some who were very aware of the presence of Arabs in the land, and some who willfully didn't want to see it because they were so focused on the needs and the trauma of the Jewish people, trying to make promises and commitments going forward without a full plan about how it would look. And ever since then, Israel has been trying to figure out the implication of those promises, how to keep them, whether to revoke them, how to be eyes open as new traumas continue to unfold tragically, and as the lens of history allows us to understand more fully some of what might have been possible, some of the mistakes that were made and cannot be undone. So is democracy a Jewish value? We hear so much democratic language in here, not actually the word democracy. You know, as Rick said, the intertwining of the moral and the legal protections of the vulnerable, which are so present in Jewish text, in Jewish law, are fundamental to the way that we understand Jewish law. The Talmud is a record of both minority and majority opinions, suggests that Judaism is at the very least compatible, if not predisposed, right, to a democratic system and a commitment to equality. I wish I could say there was a halachic mandate for democracy. As Moshe Halbertal said yesterday, of course, all of us can find a pasuk to quote to prove exactly what we want to say, so I won't say that, but I will say there is profound inclination and compatibility between Jewish thought, Jewish text, Jewish law, Jewish values, and democracy. I am not willing to accept that there is a contradiction or a binary between values of social justice, of tikkun olam, and of Jewish peoplehood. I think these are also a dialectic, very much in conversation with each other and informing each other all the time. We need to think much more deeply about Judaism as peoplehood, about Jewish peoplehood. Of course, Judaism is about history and practice and connection to God and text, and it is about how we relate to other Jews and the way in which we are connected to Jews around the world, whether we know them or we don't know them, and that our faiths are intertwined with one another. Sometimes we can ignore that and we can think about our own experience and how we feel comfortable or uncomfortable, undeniably safer than previous generations, but definitely not fully at ease. But often it is in those most difficult moments where we are forced to remember, even if we don't want to hear it, that our faiths are intertwined with one another. And as was said yesterday, this is true both for people we relate to, for Jews who are like us and share our values, and Jews who are not like us. It is also true for Jews who we might not like. So how do we do this? How do we center Jewish safety and survival without teaching a Judaism that is solely about Jewish victimhood and tragedy? How do we acknowledge the complexity and challenge and responsibility of Jewish power without erasing Jewish vulnerability? In times of the most dire tragedy for the Jewish people, it has not mattered who is a good Jew, who is the right kind of Jew, who is assimilated, who is wealthy, who is anti-Zionist, who is progressive, who is in the inside, who seems to have the power. It has not mattered. If we think that giving up who we are in order to feel safer will work, unfortunately, we have learned too many times that it will not work. So let's actually think about what we believe and who we care about and what our responsibilities are as Jews connected to other Jews, part of a larger web of Jewish peoplehood. I want to say that while we cannot ignore the numbers, the reality of what the Israeli elections have shown over the last number of cycles, and certainly the reality of this current far-right, ultra-nationalist, Jewish supremacist coalition, it doesn't mean that other voices don't exist. And that is true in this country as well, even though those percentages might be flipped. And it's so important to think about those voices, even though they might not be in power, they remain the core of Israeli democracy, fighting for its soul. Right before October 7th, there was so much energy around the democratic process, around the democracy protests, opposing the efforts to undermine the Israeli judicial system. Israelis felt that they were reclaiming the streets and the public discourse, and American religious Jews felt empowered to speak out for Israeli democracy in a way that felt new. So even in this moment of tremendous turmoil and pain and loss, we can think about how we can keep doing that in conversation with each other, seeing all of the voices, the majority and the minority voices.
Wonderful. Thank you. And now I just wanted to give the three of you an opportunity to talk to one another and to comment on each other's thoughts. Yeah. If you have immediate reactions, if not, I'll ask questions. Yeah.
Of course we have reactions. Do you want to pose some questions? Because honestly, I think we could probably talk for the next few hours.
Well, go ahead. I mean, one of the...
But we promise not to.
Yeah, one basic question I have in the scholarship in general is that really citizenship is a different sort of, that's critical to democracy, is a different sort of belonging than Jewish belonging. And so how do you square one with the other?
Can I just use a different differential between, all these divides? There's obviously the demographic slice of voters in Israel, voters here. I actually think it's a fundamental division around particularism and universalism. Within the Jewish community, within Judaism, I was having a discussion with an Orthodox colleague about an event we were planning, and I said it would be very important, in addition to expressing deep solidarity with the Jewish people and the Jewish state, and the incredible loss and pain and experience of Israelis, one of us has to very clearly articulate the suffering of innocent